Welcome to our Educator Diversity Roundtable. My name is Brianna Ross, and I am a teacher in Baltimore County. I'm a sixth grade teacher. I teach world history and AVID. I am also the Baltimore County Teacher of the Year for about one more week, and I am the 2022 Maryland Teacher of the Year. And it is my pleasure to facilitate this virtual roundtable and to welcome our State Board of Education members, Chu-Chin Chang and Rachel McCusker, Superintendent Mohammed Choudhury, our guest speaker, David Blazar, our roundtable participants, and all of our viewers on YouTube. I am so excited about this conversation that we are going to get into tonight around recruitment and retention of our teachers of color. This is a topic that is of particular interest to me, so I am very, very excited. The State Board of Education and MSDE are hosting this roundtable and a series of roundtables and other engagement events to hear about your experiences and ideas for the future of education in Maryland. So we're using this feedback to guide the development of a multi-year strategic plan that will implement the blueprint for Maryland's future and strengthen our public education system. We would love to hear from our viewers as well, and we ask that you share your thoughts on public education in Maryland by completing the strategic planning survey at marylandpublicschools.org/survey. And we'll make sure that that link is in the WebEx and is also in the YouTube chat. So keep an eye on the chat. That link is going to get dropped to you because we absolutely want your feedback. Before we get started, I'm just going to go over a few expectations and some housekeeping items. So we are live streaming this roundtable right now. It's being live streamed on YouTube from 6 o'clock to 7:30 p.m. So if you're viewing on the live stream, please use the chat feature to ask any questions, make comments throughout the evening, and we will certainly have a chance to get to those so that we have our awesome panelists who can answer your questions. And we'll be sharing those. And as a reminder, this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, so your participation implies consent. When you're not speaking, just please make sure that you're staying muted. Use the chat function if we're running sort of short on time, or if there's anything additional that you want to say, or you're like, Brianna, I got to answer this question, call on me next, right? So please use the chat feature. I'm going to keep an eye on it. And we'll make sure that we get to everybody's comments and questions. I'm going to turn it over to our superintendent for his opening remarks. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Brianna. Thank you very much for all of you taking the time out of your busy days to hang out with me for a bit. So I really appreciate it. This is one of those topics that we really need to figure out how to do well at scale. We really do, because frankly, the success of our country depends on it. Maryland is changing fast in terms of demographics. Our teacher population must also reflect our student population. And this is one of those things, research is it's settled science, as I like to say, that students, when they can see themselves in their teachers, great things happen, and cut it every which way. Discipline, getting second chances, being able to have high expectations, being able to identify for giftedness, being able to access AP courses, being able to just have someone to talk to about what they're going through. All of those things, cut it every which way. The data is very strong around what it means. And so I really appreciate you guys joining us to have this conversation. Just so you know, one of the things, as Brianna facilitates the conversation, I may cut in to ask a follow-up question. My job involves policy, right? What are the policy conditions that inhibit this or enable this, right? And then also requires me also pushing on Annapolis to look at what can we do in terms of our laws, as well as any funding implications to get this right. So as you share, the more you can share around just what does this look like in practice, that helps me. And so if you see me asking a follow-up question, well, what does this look like? That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to figure out what is the policy implication for that. So with that, I always tell everyone in our roundtable, please speak your truth. And with that, I will give it off to our State Teacher of the Year. Thank you, Brianna.
Thank you. Thank you for those opening remarks. And I know that we are all really excited about the work that you are doing and are going to continue to do to ensure the future of education in Maryland and ensure that our policy our policy matches what's happening in the classroom. So that's really exciting. I'm actually going to turn it over to our guest speaker, David Lazar, who has some things to share with us around some research that he has done on this topic. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Brianna. Thank you to the Maryland State Department of Education, the State Board of Education for hosting this event, which I agree is critically important. I'm so looking forward to taking part and to hearing all of engaging with you all. Currently, I'm a faculty member at the University of Maryland College Park, where I conduct research on teachers and teaching broadly. I come to this work as a former classroom teacher. I taught high school English language arts in the Washington Heights neighborhood of New York City, and I always bring those experiences in the classroom in students with me as I engage in research. So the reason I'm here tonight is because I wanted to share, I was invited to and wanted to share what my own research and the work of others says about educator diversity, how we might think about it, how we might set a path going forward. And I want to talk about 3 points. So the first point relates to why it is that we need to focus on educator diversity, why it is that that's so important. The second point I want to speak to is how we think about recruiting more individuals of color into school systems and into the profession. And the third, on the third point, I wanted to think about how we can ensure that the experiences of working as a teacher are productive for individuals of color once they get into classrooms. So starting with that first point, why it is that we must focus on this topic of educator diversity. And I'll agree with the point that was made before by our state superintendent, that the science is pretty clear, that we have a very convincing and consistent story on how educators of color and teacher-student race ethnicity matching has incredible benefits for students on a range of metrics. So as just one example, in a recent study that I worked on across 4 urban school districts, including one in the DMV area, I found that random assignment to a teacher of color resulted in very large impacts on the academic performance, engagement, and self-efficacy of their students. And I want to break that down in a couple of kind of sub-points here. So the effects on student outcomes were large enough to close a substantial portion of race ethnicity gaps in test score performance. I also find that the benefits, or that having an educator of color benefits all students, whether or not they're from the same racial or ethnic background. The benefits show up in particular on some of the social emotional measures that were included in our study, such as student self-efficacy. Further, I found that the effects of having a teacher of color persisted for many years down the road, meaning that it doesn't just matter in terms of your experiences this school year with this specific teacher, but that has lasting benefits over your schooling career and over time. The last thing that I found in this study is that there are a number of specific knowledge bases, skills, and dispositions that teachers of color brought to their work that seem to drive these impacts. So in particular, I saw that teachers of color were much more likely than their white colleagues to hold students to high expectations, to spend the time engaging and building interpersonal relationships with students and with families. And these are the things that have often been discussed as the mechanisms that connect educators of color to student outcomes. This is just one study, so I want to briefly point to kind of talk about another that was conducted in the state of Maryland with Maryland data in Maryland's context, in which I found that not only was it that teachers of color were benefiting students' academic outcomes and other outcomes, but it's also a broader professional staff of color in schools. So having access to school counselors of color, to instructional coaches of color was also important for students. So that's key point 1. We must focus on educator diversity as a key policy topic because educators of color are so beneficial and impactful for students. This leads me to the second point, where we necessarily have to ask, how can we do a better job of recruiting individuals of color into schools and the teaching profession? Currently, the teacher workforce nationally and in Maryland is overwhelmingly white. And even in school districts like Prince George's County and Baltimore City, where the proportion of Black and Hispanic teachers are much higher than state and national averages, they're still lower than the proportion of Black and Hispanic students in those school districts. Over the past several decades, local school systems and universities have worked together to develop a number of different programs aimed at diversifying the teacher workforce. A lot of these strategies are often referred to as, quote, grow your own programs because they aim to develop teaching talent from within local communities and therefore seem to have a lot of promise. So one, I think, great example that I think about in Maryland is the Sherman STEM Teacher Scholar Program at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, which provides resources and supports for scholars to become culturally responsive and compassionate STEM educators in Maryland public schools. At the same time, over the same time period that these programs have been developed and implemented, the demographics of the educator workforce have not changed dramatically or as much as we need to. The teacher workforce is still overwhelmingly white. This suggests that we have a lot more that we need to do to think about how we scale recruitment programs. So programs are being implemented and developed in local communities. We need to think about how we can scale them. This isn't based on research per se, or I think begs for more research, but my hunch is that to dramatically change the demographics of the teacher workforce, we need to start to think about investing early in students' K-12 careers, getting them interested in teaching from an early age. So how can we better support high school students, not just to pursue higher education, but also to consider teaching as a viable career? The last point I want to make on recruitment, on this recruitment piece, is that we need to be very thoughtful about strategies that can be targeted specifically towards prospective educators of color. Given that colorblind strategies may increase interest in the teaching profession across the board, rather than helping to change existing demographics. The third and final point I want to make and speak to relates to the experiences of educators of color once they enter schools and classrooms. Research in Maryland and nationally shows that teachers of color and white teachers are retained in their positions at roughly similar rates. So said another way, teachers of color are generally not substantially more likely to leave the profession than white teachers. However, this does not mean that the working conditions are similar for teachers of color and their white colleagues. We know from quantitative and qualitative research that teachers of color are more likely than white teachers to be staffed in hard to staff schools and positions and to take on increased job responsibilities. As with the second point I was making around recruitment, though research to date does not provide clear guidance on scalable policy solutions about how to make the teaching profession a productive experience for current and prospective educators of color. So we have a lot more work that we need to do, both on the research side and on the policy side, as we think about how we can make school systems a place that teachers of color feel supported, where they can thrive, and where they'll stay. So to bring that all together and to summarize, research consistently shows how important educators of color are to school systems, to students, and to families, and the fact that we need more of them. Diversifying the teacher workforce has to start with scalable recruitment strategies, and we have a lot more work that we need to do to understand what those are and how we implement them. So thank you again for the time and the invitation here. I very much look forward to hearing the conversation.
David, thank you so much. What an awesome way to frame this conversation. I was like furiously taking notes. Like I need more about this research. There were so many things that you said, and just a couple things I want to touch on. The very first thing that just like hit me so deeply, and I saw a whole bunch of head nods on the panel, was this idea that educators of color and teachers of color benefit all students. And I think sometimes when we think about teachers of color, and just like what you mentioned, is that teachers of color often get placed in the hardest schools, in the challenging districts, right? But it's not about putting Black teachers with Black students. It's about teachers of color are good for all of our students. And the benefits from your research seems very clear to me around building relationships, setting those high expectations. Those are things that are good for all students. And so I'm excited to hear from our panelists. I know that their ideas were buzzing around their heads as you were speaking and sort of framing this work for us today. So thank you for that, and for just that awesome introduction into this. So now that we've done that, we need to now hear from our panelists and our roundtable participants about who they are. So I'm just going to call on you one by one. Please just introduce yourself, state your full name, tell us your role, your school district or your organization. If you are in a classroom, please let us know what grade level you are. I'm going to have a particular spot in my heart for my fellow middle school educators. So I'm going to tell you that now. I'm going to take preference for my middle school educators here. But let us know what school you are, what grade level you teach, or your organization, and just give us a brief description of your work. So I am going to start with Wesley.
Hi, hello everybody. My name is Wesley, and I am a second year teacher. I teach biology and environmental science in 9th grade and 10th grade, and I work I serve some special population English language learners, and I have many students from around the world in my classroom.
Thank you. Michael?
All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Michael C. Brown. I'm a principal in Carroll County Public Schools. Primarily work with high school students because I'm at a high school. And currently I sit on the Educational Equity Council for Carroll County Public Schools.
Thank you. And I'm just going to pop back to Wesley. I realize we didn't get your school district. Can you just tell us what school district you're in, Wesley?
Okay, I wasn't sure if I'm allowed to say.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
awesome. Yeah, for Wycomico County in
Oh my God.
in Salisbury, Maryland.
Perfect. Thank you. For the rest of our panelists, if you can just also just mention what county you're in, that would be really helpful.
Okay.
We're gonna move on to my guy Doug.
Andy, Baltimore County Public Schools.
Hey, I'm sorry, Doug. I don't want to cut you off. I think your volume's just a little bit low. If you're,
Is that better? I'll speak a little louder. Is that better?
can everybody hear, or is it just me?
It's a little muffled. I don't know
It's a
if
little
it
muffled.
might be, but it's coming through. It's just a little, it's quieter than most. So.
So Doug, I'll let you situate and then I'm gonna come back to you.
That'll work.
Okay. I'm gonna go to Lucero.
Hello, my name is Lucero Espinal. I'm a second year teacher in Howard County Public School System. I am currently a high school Spanish teacher, and I also am on the equity committee at my school.
Thank you. Heather?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Heather Moraff, Assistant Principal with Howard County Public School System. I currently work with students in kindergarten through 5th grade, and I also serve as a member of the board for the Asian American Educators of Howard County. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Heather. Yuna.
Hi, good evening. My name is Yuna. I am currently an ESL teacher in Montgomery County. I serve 10th graders. And I think that's about it.
And you know what, is there a particular subject that you teach or?
Oh, so I teach shelter English for 10th grade ESL students.
Great, thank you. Christy.
Hi, Christy Kennedy. I'm a social studies teacher at in Carroll County Schools. I'm also the equity liaison for my school, as well as the advisor of Cultural Differences Unite, which is a student advocacy group.
That's awesome. Shout out to a fellow social studies teacher, Christy. Desmond, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Desmond McCall. I'm currently serving as an assistant principal in Montgomery County Public Schools. I also serve as one of the team leaders for Bond Educators, which that particular affinity group, the focus there is around advancing the efforts to recruit, develop, retain, and empower male educators of color here in our district and beyond. So thankful and grateful to be here.
Corey.
Good evening, everyone. Corey Carter. I am an assistant director with the Sherman Scholars program that David mentioned earlier at UMBC. I am a tenure educator, former middle school science teacher, former teacher of the year with Baltimore County. And so currently I support prospective teachers who want to be culturally responsive STEM educators for Baltimore City and other urban districts.
Thanks, Corey. Felix, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Felix Lazaro. I am a special educator at Prince George's County, and I am a teacher of students with very significant cognitive disabilities. I have them, all day long. I teach in a self-contained classroom, and they are nonverbal, but I love them, and I got that aha moment whenever they learn something from our lessons. Hoorah! I'm very active in MSDE, which is my local. And
Oh, Felix, we lost your sound for a second.
oh, sorry.
Oh, there we go.
As I was saying, I am very active in the union, in the associations, PGCEA and MSEA as a member of the board of directors of both associations. Thank you.
Thanks, Felix. John.
Hello, my name is John Bailey, and I'm an aspiring educator, so I'm not quite in the classroom yet. I do a lot of work with the MSDE. I actually serve as a co-chair for the Recruitment and Retention of Educators of Color Task Force. I also work with Bowie State University with their Center for mentoring Black male teachers and students. So work with them in their program that they work with young males and everything. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks. And we're gonna come back to you, Doug.
All right. Brianna, is the volume better?
That's better.
Yes,
Okay,
that's much better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Choudhury. But every time I'm on the panel with Brianna, and she's always helping me out. So thank you again for always coming to my rescue. As Brianna is a member of Team BCPS, Baltimore County Public Schools, so am I. So I am the proud executive director of the Department of Equity and Cultural Proficiency. And the role of my team in BCPS is really to build the capacity of all staff members in BCPS, about 18,000 staff members, build their capacity, build our capacity to deliver a more equitable and just education experience to every student in BCPS and to every staff member as well. So this topic we're talking about is very near and dear to my heart. Our work spans the whole school district, and again, very honored to be a part of this panel. Thank you.
Brianna, before we start, I just want to, if you did it already, that's fine, but I got to give a shout out to two of my board members are here, state board members. I just saw them. So we have Rachel McCusker, who's the teacher state board member, recently re-elected to the role. And so there is a teacher on the state board, which is pretty awesome. And then I also have board member Chin Chin Bianca Chang. She's as well off camera currently, but I just wanted to acknowledge them because, I have a really awesome board that wants to work together to figure this out. So and so I appreciate them being here as well. So I just wanted to give them a shout out. So
yes, thank you for that space. I didn't know if you wanted to say something, Rachel. I got to meet Ms. McCusker a couple months ago, and she's just wonderful and fabulous, and it just has all the beautiful energy. So thank you both so much for being here, and thank you all for introducing yourselves. Oh, did I miss? Kamani, I am so sorry. Kamani, how you let me do that? Kamani, how you let me do that? Let me swing back to you. It's cool. We saved the best for last. No worry. Go ahead.
Most definitely, most definitely. Hope everyone's doing well this evening. My name is Kimani Jones. I'm an assistant principal at the Carroll County Public School System. I'm an administrator for all of my students, but primarily I'm the administrator who supervises a regional program for students who are trauma impacted and or on the autism spectrum, and they need a more specialized instruction, smaller classroom, things of that nature. So that's what I do. Nice to meet everyone.
Thank you, Kimani. I apologize. I will not let that happen again, I promise.
And I'm a former social studies teacher as well.
Yes, so shout out to being in good company. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm really excited about this conversation. I know it will be robust. I know it's going to be dynamic. To hear about everybody's experiences. And there's a lot for us to get to, and we have a limited amount of time. So some of you chose sort of some specific questions that you want to address. So I'm going to do my best to get to them and make sure that we all have enough time to share, because I'm sure this conversation could go on for days and days and days. So we're going to do our best to make sure that we all get to share and really say the things that really matter to us. And if at any point you just feel like you need to jump in because you got to get your thoughts out, please cut me off and we'll make sure that happens, because we want to be able to amplify our teacher voices in this space. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. So I love, again, thank you, David, for framing this work for us so beautifully, because we know that having teachers of color benefits all of our students. And so our first questions are going to sort of explore a little bit about recruitment. So I'm actually going to start with Christy. And this question, I'm going to open it up to everybody, but Christy, I am going to start with you. So our first question, just tell me a little bit about why you wanted to become an educator, and what was that process like for you to enter into the teacher workforce? And if there are any barriers or challenges or roadblocks that you sort of encountered along the way, we would love to hear about that as well.
Okay, well, thank you. So actually, it started in a social studies classroom. I opened up a textbook and I just saw the smallest note on the Tulsa race riots. And it might have been 2 or 3 lines, but that was enough where I was like, I need to know more about my history. Like what got me here, about the adversity. It's more than just slavery. So went to college, did probably same as everyone, went through the whole teacher program and thing. And when I got to student teaching, where I student taught, it was a predominantly white school. And the one note that was given to me was that if I wanted to continue to teach in that area, I had to change my hair. They told me it was a little distracting. So I kind of took that and I took a step back and I was like, maybe this isn't for me. I wasn't willing to give up myself in the way I looked and things like that. But I had a lot of support, a lot of good discussions, and it kind of made me realize that it's not just me going through this, but we also had students of color in this area that were being recognized only for who they are on the outside, and that was deeming their worthiness. So that kind of pushed me to go even farther with this. And I went to another county before I came back to our county, and I realized like that my role was more than just being that teacher, but being a voice for my students and being almost that soundboard for them when they were experiencing different things. And it really kind of opened me up to not only for my students of color, but for many of my like majority type students. I'm, for many of them, the first Black teacher they have ever had. And it kind of opens their eyes, and they can kind of see me beyond the stereotypes that they had, or even having that experience of seeing not, or even hearing my perspective on history and how I experience history, because a lot of times I bring in my own artifacts, I bring in my own ideas and even paperwork from my own family, so that they can kind of see the other side of history. Because what I tell them, history is more than just one story. It's on us to be able to be open-minded and hear another's perspective. And as a high school teacher, that's what I'm training these students to do, like to understand that their perspective, their experiences are not the only ones out there, but there's so much more. And so as I continue to develop myself as a teacher, I realized that the experience and the barriers I had to get here really are serving not only my students of color and helping them to overcome their own barriers, but also to provide those ideas or those little glimpses into the life of another for my students that are not of color.
Oh my gosh, there's so much that you said there. I think this intersection of being a teacher of color and also teaching history is a really important one. That's a conversation for you and I to have later, Christy. But also this idea of being the first for some of your teachers, like being the first teacher of color, the first Black teacher, I'm sure is very similar to many of our experiences as teachers, and also when we were students too. That was very central to my experience as a student. Wesley, I'm going to ask you the same question. Can you just talk a little bit about what it was like for you to kind of enter the educator workforce? Like, why did you want to become a teacher? But what was the process like for you to actually become a teacher and to get into the classroom?
All right. I was born in Haiti. I wasn't born in America. I wanted to become a teacher in Haiti, and I started teaching at a really young age. In Haiti, they speak French and Haitian Creole. So when I get to America, I had some major challenge to overcome. I had to be able to speak English properly enough to convince the American people that I can speak effectively to become a teacher in America. So it was easy because no one really noticed you if you don't speak like really well. So I was the guy in the corner no one sees. I was just that smiling person around. I had a supportive role. After I went to college, go to high school, college, I still speak different. I still look different from the rest of the American counterpart. I said to myself, I can do it, but having people notice me wanting to do it was really hard because it's like you're the forgotten person because you cannot really express yourself in the language that the country adopted. So after college, I spent a lot of time in the laboratory again, being shy, being timid, that I speak different, I look different. I probably would never be able to do what I wanted to do, to be able to speak effectively in an American classroom, convince everybody that I can teach the science knowledge that I accumulated over the years. And with times, with persistent, resilient, a lot of practicing, a lot of looking in the mirror, a lot of pronunciation practice. And I started to be recognizable because I had a supportive role in the county as an assistant. So being around the teachers every day, talking to them, have that attitude, that right positive mindset. And again, I started being recognized after years of trying to prove that I can be a teacher. So I went to school and graduate with the Caucasian population. They're my friend. I've seen everything doing well for them, but for me, it's very slow, very slow. The reason for it is because I had barrier to overcome. The number one barrier was the language. But they, in the county that I'm currently living, all of a sudden with the immigration influx, they have a lot of Haitians, a lot of Latinos, a lot of kids from Middle East. So all of a sudden the spotlight turns on me. They said, you know what? He's perfect for this position. And I embraced that because I think everything works for the better because I wanted to teach. I want to be in the classroom. So the timing is right. I had the population comes in, and all of a sudden, not only I improve English-wise the way I speak, and I become an effective teacher in the classroom, so I can really teach anyone now. Because, but the good news is that I never give up. I keep a good mental, a good positive attitude. I never call for racism. I never call nobody hate me. I never did that. I just work. I realized that I'm a disadvantage. I wasn't born here. I do not speak the country's language, so I keep it positive. That's why I have a story. That's why I have a good reputation in the county that I go to. A lot of people respect me because I do everything right the way it's supposed to be done. And I think what I can do now is to tell the counties that even though people look different, they need to know what to do to become teachers. So it should not be like a person looking for the information. The information must be out there for everyone to know that they want you, they need you, you can do this, you can do that. I feel like I had to figure everything out and find a way in while everybody else was able to do it easily. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, Wesley, thank you so much for that story. I love that I love how your short story has really shaped your experience and how you've been able to use these challenges, not only like in your experience as an educator, but also now like what can you do in your work to help you sort of remove those barriers for other people who are English language learners or who have that barrier of language. I love that. So thank you for sharing that with us. Corey, I'm going to turn it to you to just talk a little bit about the same thing. What has your experience been like getting into the educator workforce? What brought you here? What's kept you here? And any challenges that you may have had along the way?
Thank you, Brianna. I think similar, like you already mentioned, similar to a lot of us on this call, my early experience in school, I did feel a void. I did kind of wonder, where are the teachers that look like me? And I faced, I knew there was a discrepancy there because, particularly like as a young Black boy, I knew there were Black men in my family who were smart, creative, and loving. I knew that there were people of color in my community who were that same way as well. And I just didn't see it represented in the classroom in particular. And so that was kind of there's dissonance for me, right? Because I was like, I don't see it translating, and why? Why is that? Um, so I felt that, and actually, it turns out I have two educators in my family. So my grandfather on my dad's side was an art teacher in Philadelphia. And then my grandmother on my mother's side, I never actually met her. She passed away before I was born, but she was a music teacher in New Jersey. And after I became a teacher, my mom started opening up and telling me like story. She was very, very small in stature, but held it down in the classroom, talking about her standing up on chairs so that she could be eye to eye with all her students and getting everybody involved. And so, that was something that I kind of started to understand better later in life. But I do say the first thing that jumps out at me is the discrepancy. And I think actually, Brianna, you even said like that kind of started to lead me towards wanting to try and fill that role. One of the barriers that I faced in that journey was by not seeing that example, it really made me question and doubt whether or not I actually fit in that role. As well as there was a prestige factor for me where I said, well, if I'm doing really well, if I can do really well for myself and go to college and get a degree and get on this path towards something, right, towards something meaningful or something big. At that point, and I'm gonna sound bad, but I'm speaking my truth, right? Teaching didn't feel like that for me. It felt like if I were to switch and do teaching, that I'm letting people down or I'm not living up to a full potential. And that was something that I had to wrestle with and challenge. And I'm happy to say now I'm on the other side, right? So I'm having that conversation with myself as I'm even thinking back now. It's like that's not true at all, right? And part of it is like Christy said, knowing your story. So I think when I interacted with my grandfather, I never knew him as a teacher. I knew that I loved him. I knew that he was artistic and creative, and he was affirming. Like there was African art all through his house in Philadelphia. He had a garden, award-winning garden in Philadelphia. All these things that were so dynamic about him, but I never actually saw him as a teacher in the classroom, and so that piece was missing. And then I wrote down some notes because I want to stick to my time. And then the last barrier that I'll talk about was actually going through internship. And so in the Sherman Scholars Program right now, we actually use a little of the work of Dr. Etta Hollins, and part of what she talks about is approximation and disrupting approximation. And so very much part of my experience in internship was trying to copy and paste what my mentor teacher was doing into what I was doing. And similar to what we talk about when we see dehumanization of our students of color in classrooms, because they don't fit the quote unquote, white centric mode of communication, of delivery of information, et cetera, et cetera. That actually translated as well to my experience as an intern. And so I had echoes of internalized conversations where you don't fit this mold, as well as external factors that were telling me, you're not teaching, you're not approaching this method the way you should. You're not showing up this way. And that's not to say I didn't have things to learn. I think we all do. But there was a big piece that was missing where I was being affirmed as absolutely belonging, where I could see the impact that I could have and was having with students. And so, like, just to wrap up, it seemed like it wasn't just that I needed to earn my stripes, it was that I needed to change my stripes. And so that was a very tough barrier to overcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Corey. I think what I'm really hearing from you is like this idea of, and when we think about recruitment, how do we ensure that education is a place where teachers of color belong and feel like they belong? There's this real theme of like belonging and feeling like this is a place that is accessible and welcoming to us, and a place where we can thrive and be successful. So thank you for sharing that. I want to have one more person answer, unless anybody is really like, Brianna, I got to answer this question. I really want to talk about this. Anybody burning? Okay, I do want to have Kimani answer this question as well, just about your journey and your path into the educator, into the workforce, and any barriers you may have experienced.
Can you hear me? My path as an educator was not necessarily a traditional one. I know that I struggled mightily, as a student in high school and in college. I'm a firm believer in the respect that you can learn a lot from failure. Actually, I believe failure is more common than success. And I have failed every single kind of way there is as a student. And because I have taken the time to step on every single landmine for my students, I can now tell them what they need to do in order to be successful. That's how I look at it. In terms of me becoming an educator, I didn't necessarily have like I said, the traditional path where I went through school and I student taught and things of that nature. I did acquire my degree, but it wasn't in education, it was social studies, it was in history. And I couldn't teach initially. I had to work as everything from an instructional assistant to a permanent site sub. And while I did that, I was taking courses towards my certification. And I know I worked for many years as a permanent site sub, 4, 5, 6 years, and went to apply for my certification, and I was told I didn't have enough experience. And I mean, I'm thinking to myself, I've been in the classroom for 5 years. I've been in 3 different counties, and I'm being told that I don't have enough experience. So I mean, I taught in the private sector for about 2 years, 2.5 years, and then I found out that was enough for me to come in. But not being able to come right in after I'd already put in the work, that was something that was a bit difficult to deal with. But I am a person who's not easily deterred. Like I said, as long as I can get up, I'll come in tomorrow. I'll continue. I'm a big believer in persistence. Eventually, if I knock long enough, eventually the door will come down. And that's one thing that I try to stress, upon my students, is not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you can actually get up. So just continue, and if you want anything worth having, it's worth fighting for, and you'll figure out a way to do it.
Thank you for sharing that. I love this idea of persistence and knocking on those doors. Sometimes you got to kick those doors open. So when we think around this idea of recruitment, Maryland, like lots of other states, are implementing strategies to sort of strengthen this pipeline and to increase teacher diversity. So some of them are like these grow your own programs, right? And they pull from local communities and other initiatives. How do you think we should be supporting and encouraging our students of color to enter the workforce? And that might be our students of color like David mentioned, like in K-12, like our first grade students, right? Like our youngest students, how are we getting them? How are we getting our middle schoolers, our high schoolers, and our college students? How should we be encouraging them to enter the workforce? Or what other strategies should we be thinking about and kind of talking around in order to recruit more teachers of color in Maryland? Before I do my teacher thing and call on y'all, does anyone want to start and lead us off by answering that question? Please, Desmond, go ahead.
Yes, I think Brianna, you definitely hit the nail on the head. Is that I think part of the problem is we think that recruitment needs to start like post graduation of high school. In actuality, it really needs to start at that elementary level. As an elementary administrator, I oftentimes ask my staff when we talk about strategies to think about who shows up every day, because you could be that one person for that student to say, I want to be just like so and so. I know for me, as an elementary student, I remember my kindergarten teacher, Miss Kane. Shout out to Worcester County Public Schools from the Eastern Shore. She was my reason. She was the person who said, "You are an amazing person." She was a teacher of color. She knew my mother, so I couldn't act up. But she was one who truly had that motherly role. She pushed me. She pushed me into the enrichment courses and things at kindergarten. I remember this. And it was something about her, the way that she pushed all of us, but I specifically remember how she engaged with me as a 5-year-old. I remember that. I feel that the trajectory, I was blessed with the opportunity to have teachers to continue in that pattern. As we all know, one bad year can be 3 to 5 years for a student to recover, right? So as we think about those strategies in particular, yes, the pipelines, we need those. They need to start early. We need to create spaces in the classroom at young ages where kids say, I want to be like this person. But we also, as administrators, we have to be accountable to what's going on in the classroom. If teachers aren't doing what they need to be doing and with regards to being culturally responsive and making sure that kids need what they need, we need to support them and get them the professional development that they need. And if they're not going to do that, then B, we need to figure out how to help them figure out, another passion in life, because kids might not be their thing. And I think we have to be, as administrators, intentional about that. I think from the district level down, I think that message needs to be clear. I don't think it's clear enough. Oftentimes, I know I can say for, in my district, sometimes, people are, you hear about administrators who pass the trash, so to speak. We know that there's challenges with teachers. We know that there are teachers who consistently cause harm to kids, but we just, allow them to go off into the next school. Well, they're out of our hands. Whew, so I'm good. They're not in my school. But that we're accountable to every kid in our district, regardless of, what level we're teaching, what grade level we're teaching. And I think we as administrators have to be accountable to that. The last thing I'll say is at the district level, allowing for affinity groups. And so that they can, because only affinity groups know what they need, right? You can't give me what I need, as was shared earlier, during, I think it was Corey that shared during his internship year, he was kind of trying to be like the teacher because that's what he felt he needed to do, right? But if you don't ask the intern what they need, or you don't ask, teachers for this matter, what they need, then you can't give us what they need and people don't come, I know in our district, people often feel in Montgomery County, oh, you guys are, you think you're the cream of the crop. You're not even looking for Black and brown teachers. That is not true. We need them everywhere. We need you. But I think because we're not asking enough questions within those affinity groups, we don't know how to recruit because we don't know, one, where to find them. We assume that just in the back, right down the street is the only school we can go to recruit. But just being strategic and intentional about how we're recruiting teachers also is a strategy that I think we all should consider at the district level.
Yeah, thank you so much, Desmond. First of all, I just got to say, shout out to those good kindergarten teachers. Miss Carruthers was my reason for becoming a teacher. She was my first Black teacher and one of only. So first of all, we got to shout out to the good kindergarten teachers. Second, I think this idea around intentionality and accountability on the admin level is just so important. And I want to actually shift to Michael because I'm glad you mentioned that you're in Montgomery County. And if we know about the demographics of Montgomery County, and Michael, you're in Carroll County where things look very, very different. And so I just want to hear from you around this, because your demographics are different, but also from an administrator perspective, what does this look like for you around implementing these strategies, or what should we be doing to make sure that our students are entering the educator workforce?
Right. Thank you. I mean, it's a lot of good points that have already been made with this, and especially Desmond made some incredible points. I would say first and foremost, right, we can beat around the bush about a lot of things. And I know state superintendent understands this. Like, extra funds, and I know the blueprint is on the way, but the blueprint, um, we could speed that up and have that today. That would be awesome because we need extra positions, especially in the high school world, elementary, middle. Um, those first 3 years we already talked about. It's pivotal. We've been knowing that in education that those first 3 years are pivotal. Um, Most school districts have some type of mentoring program, but it's not as robust as it needs to be to really support teachers. We do it kind of on the surface level, where a mentor will come in, might be, once a month, whatever it is, and they meet with the teacher and check in and those type of things. We need something that is a little bit more strategic and I think a little bit more refined. And the only way you can really do that is if you have those extra positions within your school building to do that. I know that my school there's teachers that will sign off to be mentors, but they're also full-time teachers as well. So it's very difficult to mentor teachers while you're also worried about your own practice. You need to be strategically worried about just focusing in on recruiting, maintaining relationships with those teachers and making sure that they're doing the things and supporting them in the classroom. And that's something that costs money. And I think that's one of the things that we're talking about policy, that we could really take to the state board and others in Annapolis and make sure that we're supporting that. Because I think sometimes we think at some of the higher levels, we don't really understand if you're not teaching, you're not doing anything. And that's not true. And that's not the case. We have to show by adding these extra positions and building strategic programs within our school districts that this is something that can turn things and opportunities around. I will also say that starting at an early age is really profound. Um, but how do we do that, right? I think it's really imperative. One of the things I try to do at my school, which because of the pandemic got cut short on, but shadowing days with students is just going from bus to dismissal, from time to get picked up to time to go home, shadowing them, going class to class, eating lunch with them. The whole day, you're just immersed in their day, so you know exactly what it's like, what food they're eating, how comfortable the chairs are, the whole 9 yards. And a lot of people don't understand what kids go through unless you actually do that. And I think the same thing, if you work in reverse, it's the same thing with kids. They don't understand what teachers go through. They don't understand what administrators go through. In order for them to have an interest in what you do, they really need to be immersed in what you're doing each and every day. And I think having shadow days with students that are younger, allowing them to come into your school building, allow them to spend a day with you, allow them to eat lunch with you and get to know you as a teacher, will then give them that aha moment. They're like, man, I didn't think about being a teacher, but now I've actually thought about it. Now I've seen a day in the life of a teacher. I'm really, really interested. So I think those are some of the things that we can do to kind of turn things around.
Michael, thank you for lifting that strategy. That was one of the things I was thinking, like, yeah, let's start early, but how do we do that? So thank you for saying that. And I saw Desmond put in the chat, be principal for the day. I'm sure you would love that. You could take a kid and just let them do your job and you go be the student. I'm sure that's probably a good strategy for all of us.
Yes, it is.
That's a good strategy. Thank you for that, Desmond. Heather, I'm going to jump to you. And I especially since I definitely want to get this perspective in counties, right? Since we're all coming from these different places. So Heather, what do you sort of think around these programs and what we should be doing to support a more diverse teacher workforce?
Sure. So yeah, when Desmond was talking and when Michael was talking, I was thinking so much about just that early action, right? So not waiting. Many times in my experience too, I knew before high school I wanted to be a teacher. And then throughout high school, I was able to really focus and gear myself into being ready for college, being ready for teaching. So I thought about logistically how we could do this at the elementary level. A lot of high schools actually already have programs where the students in high school are working maybe an academic life skills program within the high schools. But I think partnering elementary schools and high schools together and having interested high school students come out to elementary schools and gain like a really early internship experience could be an idea that would work. And that way they're not, they're developing mentors naturally through the teachers that they might be shadowing, through the administrators. And even better if we can find mentors who are of color as well, just that relatability. And then also in the elementary school world, this is at a really kind of superficial level, we do have career weeks. We just had ours here, and we had students interviewing teachers, interviewing administrators, and that's huge. I mean, just learning more about the roles is something that I think is really effective. And one of our fourth graders, I will remember this, and this was early on, she came running up to me and she said, "Mrs. Maranoff, we look so alike." And I said, "We absolutely do." And she said, "Yeah, and all the kids think you're my mom," which I was like, okay, we won't get into that. That's kind of a bias and microaggression. But she was beaming, and every time I saw her, she related to me, she waved to me. And there's something about that, right? That connection, and knowing that if she wants to be an administrator of school one day, she can, because Mrs. Maranoff is, and she looks just like my mom. But in addition to those ideas, also just thinking about in the Asian culture and with AAPI community, a lot of their influence comes from parents. And I think the misinformation or the education of parents not thinking that there are other pathways and opportunities for teachers is huge. And so I know that that was my own experience. I've actually had sit down talks with worried Asian parents because their child wants to be a teacher, and they're very worried about this because they pictured them as doctors or lawyers. And so just getting out there in the community and really teaching some of the parents that there are other opportunities as well outside the classroom and beyond, as we all know. And then I think it's really important to tap into who is already working within our schools. We have a number of support roles, and honestly, in those support roles, there are, at least within our county, many women and men of color. And I think thinking about how can we support them in a program where they can do the work, also get the field experience, get certificated. And so we do have programs right now in our county that support this, but I think doing more of that is really important. So those are just, a few of the ideas. And then one last thing, I think it's really important to think about how we prep our human resource department and our administrators within the counties. How are we sharing with possible candidates, possible interviewees, what we're doing to work on the diversity, equity, and inclusion within our county to bring people in? And so one of the experiences this past summer, as we were going through an interview and selection process, is we were, bragging about and really proud of the work we were doing in that area, and we're sharing this with the candidates. And one of the candidates, after the fact, after she selected our school, right, because it's a competition in the summer, you're really trying to recruit, she said one of the things that set this interview team apart from others is that the work that you were doing with diversity, equity, inclusion. So how are we promoting that and bringing people in? Because that is, I think, as someone who would be interviewing, that's attractive to know that they're doing the work that's important and passionate for you.
Thanks so much for that, Heather. And I also just want to give space, and I appreciate that you lifted up the experience of our AAPI community. And I think that's a really important lens to have, because I think often, and we'll just be honest about it, often when we talk about teacher diversity, we often think we exist sort of in this dichotomy of black-white, and we don't consider the other, what diversity means. And so I think being intentional about how we reach out to our communities and we reach out to our families, even just around their perceptions around what this profession is and what that means, I think that's really important. Doug, I want to swing to you around this question, because we've been hearing from some administrators, but I want to hear just from your perspective as someone who's really deep in this equity work. What does this look like for you?
Wow. So first of all, just, love was being shared. Corey talked about taking notes. We thank you all for being in this space with me and what you all are sharing. So I love the energy, love the ideas, looking to run with some of these. So I guess when it comes to, and I'm looking at, I guess, the recruiting piece and the retention piece as far as the overall support. And I'm going to speak from my own personal experience. A supportive network, supportive nurturing network, and leadership that invested in my well-being and prosperity. And that's what I had when I came into the schoolhouse. And that's what I'm trying to return back to teachers of color, in my everyday. So, what does that look like? So for me, and let's talk about teaching in general, it can be isolating, it can be lonely. So you're a lot of times the only adult in the room. You might have, instructional assistants, you might have other adults. A lot of times you're the only adult in the room. You're giving your all to your students. and then it can be draining, right? So if you get your planning period, I'm thinking of my elementary colleagues, I taught high school, that can be rigorous. I'm thinking especially for elementary, right? So I see you doesn't, right? So you got this rigorous environment, and then what I would do at the end of the day is look for my network. And a lot of times it was other black male teachers, and it was members of the building service staff, because I used to count, there were more black men in the building service staff than there were in the teaching ranks. But we were all black men, and we had some commonalities, and we shared those out, and we nurtured ourselves. And that's what kept me going day in and day out. And then I had administrators of various races, various identities, and they invested in me and wanted to make sure that I was good and that I was growing as a teacher, and they were there to support me. And these things come to mind because when I hear about what teachers are encountering that are questioning their choice, teachers of color questioning their choice in education, they're not getting that. The other thing, if those two things I mentioned are the same things we want for our students. So we want that nurturing network for our students, and we want them to have educators that invest in them, adults that invest in them. So another warning I would say, and I'm hearing about this late, more so recently, teachers of color who go into buildings primarily with students of color and watch other teachers oppress these students. And then these teachers feel like they have nowhere to turn because there are cultures and systems that are oppressive, that are racist, that are designed to other certain students. And when teachers come in to do right by students and they encounter that environment and they fight and they fight and they try and they do everything they can, they don't know where to turn. Again, what do you do? Where do you go? So I'm thinking about the schoolhouse experience, the district-wide experience. So working in district-wide, we're trying to disrupt any inequities we see, any oppression we see of students, of staff. And it's about, again, that nurturing environment and then investing in folks and making sure that when they define what their prosperity is, what their success is, that they have someone who's invested in them and helps them along the way. One last thing I wanted to point out, I just heard about this recently, if you look at, particular schools, sometimes when you come into the space, you found an administrator who did invest in you and then who did support you. And that situation, that experience might be so different than what you've experienced elsewhere that you're not going to leave there. So that might prevent you from actually growing any other opportunities. So that's where the district has to make sure they're being intentional. It was said before, I think Heather said it last, being very intentional about how we work with our teachers of color. You can't just broad brush and come up with, David, I think he mentioned it in the research, you can't just come up with this is good for all teachers. Let's be specific, because there is a burden that teachers of color will carry. So I'll pause so others can speak, but thank you again for this space.
No, Doug, that first of all, it's like a mic drop moment, but I feel like you have segued so perfectly into the next question. Before I get there though, John, I did just want to ask and see if you had any thoughts about this, because we've heard from some administrators and some district level folk, but as an aspiring educator and someone who's really rooted in this work around recruitment, I wanted to make sure I gave you space if there was anything that you wanted to share about strategies that maybe are working for you right now in terms of diversifying our workforce.
I would say first things first. I think teachers have to watch how they approach the conversation of talking about the field of teaching. Why would I want to become a teacher if I hear my teacher talking about how much they hate their job or how little the pay is? Why would I want to become a teacher? And we really think about it, how many students have been deterred from wanting to become an educator because of this? I think that's the first step. I think the second step is I think I think colleges and school districts could work together. One thing I try to do, I keep trying to do, I want to go in and talk to students inside of school. Is there a day, we can have an assembly, where college students can go talk to who are majoring in education, go and talk to these students. I feel like military recruiters do it. My military recruiter still got to try to recruit me in the military, still hits me up. I block his numbers, but, but still, how about we go in to do that with college students, or maybe even if there's a staff member that can go inside schools and say, hey, you ever thought about becoming a teacher? We have to prioritize that. I think another thing is these we have a lot of these grow your own programs, like a lot of Ed Rising, TAM. One thing I noticed, one thing I always talk about is I never was told about these programs, and I made it known I wanted to become a teacher. And when I do look at these programs, they don't have too many students of color, and especially Black males in these programs. So how can we go about reaching out to these students, outside of these programs because they're not in, they're not in it for us to talk to. So how can we go outside of these programs and see, and uplift the education field and show there's more to being a teacher. There's more, and that's one thing we do at Bowie State. We show, we talk to these students, but we only talk to them about being a teacher. We talk about the different aspects of being a male educator, of being, you can be a teacher, you can own your own business, the different avenues that you can have while being a teacher. You can be a musician. I believe Mr. Carter, if I'm not mistaken, you're a musician as well, and the different avenues that you can approach. I think that's the second step we have to take. We have to make sure when we talk about this, we're taking it serious and we're involving everybody, college students, we're involving the high school, elementary, and just making sure we create some kind of pipeline with another thing, just real quickly, mentoring is one big thing. Mr. Handy is actually someone I look to as a mentor. I had him come and talk at one of the events that I had at my school, the points of Black male educators and mentors, and ever since been connected with me. I need something, I'll reach out to him. I want to invite him to something I'm doing. I actually invited him to this. I didn't know he was going to be here. So it's mentors are so important, and we have to. I have a lady who reaches out to me every so often, just checking in. Hey, how you doing? Just making sure I'm staying the course. That's so important, especially to us who are coming up, trying to become educators, because sometimes I have doubts. But you know what? Right now I'm in my internship. When I go inside of school, when I see, when I go there and I ask the student questions, they come to me and they have conversations. Just seeing the relationships that I can make. Just having a little bit of teaching experience that I do have, it reassures me. So plus we have to get our college students to these classrooms as soon as possible. We can't wait till they get to the end of their end of their school year, and then they might have changed their major, or they might, because that's one thing that we're in dire need to do. That's one thing we want to do, is get inside classrooms and feel that teaching experience, see it at play. Is this really what I want to do? And then that answers the question where I say, oh yeah, definitely, this is what I want to do. I think that is so important. Thank you.
John, thank you. Thank you so much for that. First of all, this idea around mentorship, and I think this is so important for teachers of color. Doug and I had this conversation just yesterday around some of the ways that teachers of color, Black teachers in particular, navigate school buildings is like, who do I know and who can I go to? And if I need to make a transition, I'm only going to a place where I know someone over there has my back. And I think that's really important. And also this idea of making sure we get our college students into the classroom early. And just like you said, not at their senior year when they're trying to make sure that they have all, like, getting them in at the beginning. And I actually want to shift, and Lucera, I want to talk to you because I know you were a part of a Grow Your Own program. So I'm curious a little bit about your experience, but also in tandem with that, what are now that you're in the classroom, what are some of the conditions that have made teaching challenging for you as a person of color? And if there are any sort of unspoken asks of you as a teacher of color, those unspoken expectations, what are they and how do they make your work more challenging?
Thank you. So for just a bit of background, Howard County Public School System had this partnership with McDaniel College to create a Grow Your Own program specifically to create teachers of color. So they ended up selecting about 12 Howard County students, and I was one of them. And the promise was that they would cover all expenses for our studies, literally everything. So it was more than a full ride. Books, they covered our room and board. They made sure we had a job during the summer. Our internships all had to be within our county, so it would help us further our understanding of the future schools we would eventually be working at. And the promise was just that we had to make sure that we could study something that we could eventually teach, specifically in the middle and high school realm, because that's where they noticed that there was a very big disparity and there was a giant lack of teachers of color. So I ended up choosing Spanish, and here we are, 4 years passed, pandemic happened, we graduated, and what we had to do in return of part of this contract was that we would have to work for the county for 3 years in our position, or something within education if we could not find a teaching position, so as a paraeducator, so forth. And right now we're on year 2, so we only have a year left in the contract, very exciting. But when the program initially started, I was one that I was very motivated by the fact that they would cover a lot of the costs. Because for me and many students in the Hispanic Latino community, college, we're the first ones in our family to graduate. So when it comes to college, it's this big world. We don't know what we're doing. So for them to open this door was like a huge benefit to us because it was like, oh my gosh, one less obstacle. But once we got there, we realized that the college that we were going to was predominantly white. And so that's where we noticed that there was a very big lack of mentorship. So I myself did not know how to navigate college itself. Everyone I knew helped me in my high school with completing the FAFSA. Once you get to college, how to do your laundry, just basic needs of how do you study for a final exam, what are office hours, getting to know your professors, what are some classes that are going to be super beneficial, not only for you to take to complete your bachelor's degree, but did you know you could also take some classes for fun? All of these things were many things that me and the other teachers in the cohort, we found that, hey, this is actually a lot more difficult. We don't really know how to navigate it. So between ourselves, we were helping each other. So I would text one person and be like, hey, did you sign up for classes? Because I don't know how to do this. And then another person was like, oh my gosh, like I know we're going to be doing these internships, but I didn't know there was a dress code. My family could barely cover the cost of college, let alone my mom, who had a lot of blue collar jobs. She didn't really know how to what this dress code would be. So what she did was she took me to the thrift store and she was like, I think this looks fine. But then when I got to school, then that's where I was like, okay, is this school appropriate? We all look younger than our actual age. So then it's like, we don't want to be mistaken for the student. So this was some of the issues that we found that, no one really teaches you how to build your resume. No one really teaches you, what's this etiquette once you're in the classroom? How should you be interacting with students? And that was another big issue I noticed, at least within my corner, that as a Latina and someone who is teaching Spanish, from all of my internships and even now working with other world language teachers, I realize I am one of the few heritage speakers teaching Spanish. So for a lot of my students who would walk into the classroom, they look at me, they're like, wow, you actually know Spanish. And I'm like, yeah, this is exciting. So I was able to bring a lot of my culture, just like I believe it was Christy who mentioned, like bringing your heritage into the classroom, adding that extra pizzazz, adding that extra sparkle to really engage students in. And for all of my students who have never seen someone who looks like me, when they walk into the classroom, they're like, oh my gosh, I feel connected to this. And it was great. I was able to put my students' heritage in because, like, I'm Mexican, so I was able to connect from students from Central America, South America, bring in the slang. And it also was something I could bring to the table for all of the veteran teachers. They're like, oh, you're new. I could help out with the technology, which was helpful during the pandemic. It was great that I could speak Spanish. So they're like, oh my gosh, you understand where these students are coming from. But it was a double-edged sword because it led to many of my schools that they would ask me during my own personal time, hey, I have a parent who doesn't speak English. Can you translate? By the way, I can't communicate with this student. Do you know what's going on? And also additional things where, hey, by the way, are you related to this student? And I'm like, no, I am not related to this student. Um, yes, we both speak Spanish, but we're from different parts. It's like you're trying to compare someone from Baltimore to DC. It's like two different things. Like you're going to get confused. And I felt like as a new teacher, I could not say no. And so it was definitely like I was backed into a corner. Is it proper for me to say yes? And all the other teachers were like, yeah, we do it. It's okay. And I'm like, all right, but that work-life balance, I really don't know how to manage it because this is something that hits me personal for home. And at the same time, it also brought bigger issues where everyone kind of, and I'm sure everyone has been used as this token of, by the way, like, I don't know what's going on with this student. Can you take the lead on this? And I'm like, I don't teach the student. I have no record, no background. I don't know what other perspective I can give that you have not already tried, other than I'm new. So maybe a fresh face will help, but that can work with anyone. So those were some of the things that I definitely interacted, and also given the times that we are in politics, I also did face a lot of those issues where other teachers and students would often say a lot of derogatory comments towards me about my citizenship, my language, my background. And granted, these were students who were coming in AP honors classes. So for me, it was very much a, would you still say this to another teacher who is not Hispanic? And also, I've also had a lot of staff members address me in a way of, are you the ESOL teacher? Are you a parent? Are you a student? Basically, very much like demeaning my position. I'm like, no, I studied to get to this position. And just those little comments of, wow, your English is great. Where did was your ESOL teacher? Where did you end up going? And I'm like, I was born and raised here. So those were some of the obstacles that I faced that I just felt that it did not prepare me in the grow your own programs that I felt like were a really big obstacle. And I felt like if we had that support, we had that network, just like everyone else was mentioning, those connections, even just another teacher of color. And I've barely met any other Hispanic teachers, but I've met a lot of other teachers who were Asian, who were Hispanic. And they're like, hey, I see you. We're not the same culture, but there's so many aspects we can relate. And that honestly helped me not cry at the end of the day like all of us did during the pandemic.
I just want to acknowledge from my seat as the state superintendent, I'm well aware of the invisible tax that educators of colors pay each and every day. In addition, you just can't be a teacher. You have to be other things for that school system who structurally has not figured out how to do this work at scale. So go translate this for me. Go be the disciplinarian. Go do this. Go do this. And for our administrators in the room, and then it stunts you in ability to get higher level positions because they're looking at your resume and they're like, what duties and responsibilities did you have? We had to make this shift in San Antonio, and that's a predominantly Latino district, but we had noticed that with our Black population, our Black administrators, we were turning them into disciplinarians and they were not getting, resume builders that other leaders were getting. So this can happen just even in a district that is, not majority white. So I hear you loud and clear, Lucero, and know that on the state level, that is something that I'm well aware of, and I also feel personally as well too as a leader of color. So thank you for sharing that and bringing that to the fold. Thank you.
I do just want to mention, I hope everybody could see, even though I know Lucero was sharing about her challenges and that invisible tax, and Corey put that in the chat, and you were getting all these head nods and just affirmation. I do just want to point out, if y'all could see the joy on her face when she was talking about how her students were able to connect to her because of this shared language. So I wanted to say that because there was so much joy in your story, and I felt that and I resonated with that. So thank you for sharing that with us. Yuna, I want to ask you the same question as well. Just sort of thinking about what are some of these challenges that you've had. And I also want to say, because we are getting, this conversation is so rich, and I want to make sure that we all can share so that everybody has an opportunity, that we have about like a minute or two a person. So I do just want to say that. But I absolutely want to hear from you about sort of the same thing. What are some of those spoken and unspoken expectations of you as a teacher of color?
Well, not so much as color as well, but also as someone who grew up as an immigrant and as someone who went to ESOL, which is why I became an ESOL teacher in the first place. But I did notice that there are some work that needs to be put in for just being culturally responsive, culturally aware. So one of the experiences I had was, this was my first year of teaching, and it was my first year teaching in a high school. And I was talking to another teacher, and she had mentioned, I believe, and I was talking to her about how it's kind of hard teaching English literature, not ESOL, at the time, because it was brand new. I've not had a lot of experience with it. But one of the comments that she had made was, if English was my second language, it would be hard for me too. But that's not where I was getting at. I was trying to say, this whole experience is new. I'm just having a hard time getting through this. It wasn't about like my background or anything like that. But then it made me think about how, if I'm getting this kind of question or this kind of, light, how much more so are our students getting? And how much of a less expectation do our students also have? So those are some of the things that I have noticed as I enter my third year of teaching. Another thing, and this was something that kept coming up as I was listening, was I'm sorry for going back to the other topic of recruiting, but I recently had a student who is in my ESOL class, and as we were sharing about like what do you guys want to be when you grow up? A lot of them said auto mechanic or I want to be a nurse, but only one student said I want to be a teacher. And I was like, wow, okay. Well, first thing that came to mind was I want to make sure that he gets what he needs before he leaves us with all the information that he needs to become a teacher. Because as the first person in my family to go to college and become a teacher, I had to figure all of that out myself. And I wanted to make sure that he had everything. But I realized that I didn't have a lot of information myself to give him other than the path that I walked. And I know there are so many different ways that you can become a teacher, but I didn't have clear information or clear pinpoint to give him. So those are some of the challenges that I have also noticed as I was teaching.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for returning to that topic around recruitment, because I did want to ask you that, and you had a good story to share. One of the things I'm also hearing, and I heard it in what you said and what Lucero said as well, is just this idea of these microaggressions and micro insults that teachers of color are experiencing when they walk into these buildings. Felix, I wanted to hear from you if you are experiencing or have experienced anything similar around some of the challenges of being in the classroom as a person of color.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely, Miss Brianna. You know, my accent, is has always been uh, put on the line because, not only students, but even adults here, um, like my students would say, I am an American. Are you an American? Things like that, and, special ed students, especially here in Prince George's County, and adults, I would confide that something happened, and one of the adult mentors would say, oh, it's just a matter of culture. You will get over that later. And, so I tried to console myself when I first became, in the Philippines. I was a government employee, and then I came in here as, an immigrant. My wife was the direct hire by PGCPS. And when I came in here, I wasn't a teacher. I worked for the bank, and then I saw the opportunity in the resident teacher program. The resident teacher program was very helpful for me, to come in as it was my entry point, in the school system. And then there was a very short preparation. I passed the praxis, I passed the observation requirements, and then, uh, that was June, and then August, I was already in the classroom, and so there was not enough preparation for me. It was like a do-it-yourself teaching, you know baptism of fire, so to speak. So these are the challenges from my students, from the adults in the building, you know however, one thing that really helped me is to be what you call that, determined to really teach. And I would spell quit, QUIT. I would spell quit as NEVER every day. By the grace of God, I would be spelling quit as NEVER. Had it not been for my, I would say, my really my desire or my passion to teach, I could not have been, in the school system for 15 years now. So I was able to overcome the challenges, but I wanted to also help other educators, especially, the new educators. I have been very active in my association in the local as well as in the state level. I am the board liaison to the early career educators, and I wanted to, impress upon them that they could do it. So right now, um, I feel, very, I would say, this blueprint for Maryland future has been very helpful in recruiting educators, and also career changer educators. It is very helpful because when I came into the school system, I was just receiving half of that entry-level salary that Blueprint for Maryland Future is offering. So, I was able also to overcome this insecurities or very challenging things in the classroom by means of the other veteran educators that were with me, who stayed with me by my side, helping me out, helping in my lesson planning, as well as, collaborating in their collaboration efforts. I have been able to overcome the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Felix. I spell quit the same way that you do. That's so interesting. Our alphabets must be real similar. As we sort of close up, and if anybody has just 30 seconds or less, if you just had one thing that you feel like we should be focused on first, what do you think? And I'm going to leave this open-ended, so hop in, whoever would like to hop in. What do you need? What do we need from school systems to better support our teachers of color and to elevate their voices? If there's one thing that you can sum up in a quick 30 seconds, what would that be? And I'm gonna let anybody hop in on that.
And I'm just gonna add, while you guys do that, if you can, if you want to also frame it as a policy change, right, in that pipeline. Look, already given, teachers need to be paid more, overdue. Starting across the pipeline, it shouldn't take 20, 30 years to get to 80. We got work to do there, so I got you on that. But in terms of the preparation pipeline, from the licensure experience to the induction, if you can frame it as a policy, if you want to, then go ahead and do that. I'm thinking from the state lens, but if it's at the district level, I'm still gonna, think about this state implications as well. So sorry, Brianna, I had to add that.
No, thank you I should have said that. You're better at this than me. So from a policy level, we're gonna go from Corey, Lucero, and then John, and if anybody else wants to share.
All right, I'm gonna try to do it in 15 seconds. So I think if you can consider problematizing the question, a lot of times we frame things in the sense of like, what's wrong? Why don't these people want to be teachers, right? But the question could also be like, well, why does everyone, why do we also have such a high number of recruitment or hiring of other folks? And so part of that could be addressing some of the microaggressions, working to disrupt white supremacist culture in our schools and in our processes. Thank you.
Lucero, go ahead.
So for me, it's once again going back to the education. How do you keep the teachers that you have now? So what are ways to help them learn about the benefits for education, getting their masters, getting more leadership opportunities? How do you become a TDL? How do you become a liaison? How do you get, I want to have my own intern. I want to give them that experience. So those little things, what are some leaderships that you can give for those new teachers to help them stay?
I want to take it back to mentorship. I think it falls under the pipeline. Having mentors for in-college students, for aspiring educators like myself, where people, actual teachers, mentor college students, and then we go down to college students can mentor high school, and and then or elementary or whatever. We just follow that line down so we can so we can have someone to support and make sure we stay the course.
Awesome. Yuna, Michael, and Kimani, please go ahead.
Just going back, I'm still thinking about that one student who shared with me that he wants to become a teacher, but just having that clear pinpoint person maybe in our high schools, middle schools, or elementary school that can give them the information that they need in order to become a teacher. And also just piggybacking on the idea of mentorship, even pairing them up with someone who is the same race or same culture as them. I think that would be great.
Yeah. Can I say something?
Please.
Okay. So, as I said, I have been very active in my association in the local as well as in the state level. Just recently, the Asian American Pacific Islander caucus was approved by MSEA Board of Directors. So we are inviting all, Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and the Pacific Islanders to become part of this caucus so that we can support each other. And we are going from Prince George's County, expanding our territory up to the state level. So we are inviting all of you. As we say, there's no man is an island. No man is an island. So we can, collaborate. We can group together, and this is going to be a very good support group for us. Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Felix. Michael and Kimani.
Yeah, really quickly, you talk about diversity and equity, the work, I mean, that's already built into the Maryland Blueprint. That's a major bucket. However, when you're talking about accountability piece, that needs to be really thought about on how we're really going to tackle that from the state level. A lot of school districts already have, equity officer or somebody like that in their school district. However, most of the school districts, that may be all they have. They may be having one person to do the work of an office of 10. So how can you really make change in a school district when you're talking about, making individuals of color feel welcome when that training and that diversity and equity piece is not getting to the masses? So we have to find a way where that's not an optional thing anymore. That's just what it is. And how will we do that policy wise? I think that's what we really need to look at and change. Whereas though we're not just thinking about just teachers and educational leaders, we're also talking about our community and our kids. Everybody needs this equity piece because that's where things are kind of shifting and moving to.
Got it.
Once people get into a position in education, opportunities for growth, whether that's advising, mentorship, coaching, things like that, giving them an opportunity to be leaders at the school level. Also, as we all know, education is expensive. If there's some type of a tuition reimbursement, or if school systems are willing to pay for continuing education credits, master's degree, even beyond master's degrees, doctoral degrees. And I'm pretty sure that everyone on this panel right now left school in some type of debt. If that could be, I'm not saying necessarily race, that would be a great thing, but something to help educators with that, because it's really daunting to think that you can go, 6 figures into debt, and this is what you're going to be making to try to pay on that for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So just something like that.
We can shoot for a race. I hear you.
I support that. I support the let's erase that. Desmond. Oh, okay. Yeah, we're here. I don't think anybody would put their hand down. Yeah, we on the same page about that. First of all, just thank you all. This was just such. I feel like we could just continue and go on and on with this conversation. There is so much to say. There's so much to be said. But I'm just so glad that we were able to hear your voices tonight. I do just want to thank the YouTube live viewers for your comments. Kimberly, your suggestions were wonderful. Wesley, Heather, and Doug, your comments really resonated with the viewers, and they showed their appreciation in the chat. And it's going to be included in the transcript, so you all will get to see it. And I'm going to turn it over. I feel like I'm about to choke. I'm going to turn it over to our superintendent if you have any closing remarks before we close out.
We got work to do, and so know that it is going to be a major priority of mine, of making sure the state of Maryland is reflective of our educator population, is reflective of our student population. I mean, our students are already there. Maryland is now a majority minority state when it comes to our students, and we should have our teachers also reflect that. Of course, we're not going to get there overnight, but just know it's a twofold battle. It's one, the future pipeline is also keeping the leaders we have, and also not just in the educator ranks, also in the administrator ranks and leadership ranks, all the way up to local superintendents and state superintendents. And so I hear you loud and clear. And this is something, it will be a priority. One of the things I'm going to do is just push a lot of grant making around Grow Your Own. But I also believe the experience Lucero had, graduating with minimal debt, if not zero debt, is a major deal. These educators don't go into this for money, but at the same time, shouldn't have to go into debt for a profession isn't necessarily comparable in terms of pay for other same level of education. And so that's the minimum we could do in terms of debt. And then once you're in, what does induction look like, and mentorship, and then also just the overall experience of just what it means to be in a school system. And so I I hear you loud and clear. Please feel free to email me ideas. I like the idea, Desmond, of auditing individuals who have left the. I can commission a lot of studies, so that sounds like a great study to look at. We have an awesome researcher in University of Maryland, a fan of his work. I might ask him to do it, maybe if David is down for it. But we have many people who are interested in this work, and just know that this is something I am thinking about and obsessing about. So just know you have an advocate in that regards, and do not be shy to throw out ideas. I do read every email. Trust, I can assure you that. So please shoot away your ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, to all of our participants, those of you who are viewing on our YouTube Live, the State Board, and MSDE. Thank you for joining us tonight and for participating in this roundtable discussion with our school leaders, our teachers, our educators. Your feedback absolutely guides, just like our superintendent said, your feedback guides the development of this strategic plan, and we want to hear from as many people as possible. So there is a strategic planning survey that we encourage everyone to complete. It's at marylandpublicschools.org/survey. Please fill it out, share it with your communities. If there's someone who you think would have benefited from hearing this conversation and will have feedback, please send them the link to this YouTube. It lives on YouTube forever, so send them the link to this so that they can check it out and fill out the survey and give our state leaders the feedback that we desperately need to improve education in Maryland and certainly to diversify our workforce. Thank you all for this. Everybody have a wonderful night.
Thank you.